Okay, so welcome to the presentation on presenting posters, on designing them or preparing them and doing the actual presentation as well. We'll be focusing a little bit on each aspect, okay? So for many of you, as a student, this may not be an appropriate title for you, so you might be more agreeable to this one. So you have to present a poster. Most people don't like presenting posters. In fact, that's probably true not just of undergraduate students, but many of us. Presenting a poster can be a little stressful, and it does take quite a bit of work, as we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so I guess the first thing that people tend to ask is, well, why do I have to do this? Why are we bothering with this? Why are we making students do posters? And there's a simple question to this. Basically, it has to do with active learning. It's a form of allowing our students to dive into a subject and to really learn well enough about it that they're able to present something as relative experts. Okay, so it encourages active learning, something that we cannot always encourage in lecture. Okay, so active learning tends to be a very good way of learning anything. It tends to stick with you a lot more than me just talking at you about something where you're not really paying attention necessarily. So it's a great form of encouraging learning to take place. It also allows you to develop valuable skills, like, for example, organizing your thoughts, presenting things in an organized way, but also just the skill of speaking. Public speaking is an important skill to develop over time, and that's one of the things that we are trying to do when we are assigning you these different presentations that you have to do at the end of the semester in many courses. We're not doing it to torture you. We're actually trying to get you guys to develop these skills that you guys will need at some point in your life, whether it's in biology or not biology, whether you're just having to make a speech.
So sorry to interrupt, Mr. Stefan.
Yes?
I have received more than 10 emails that they cannot join. Can you resend me the link or something to resend it to everyone? Because that's not normal. More than 10 emails by now.
Okay. Let me see if I can. So once again, the answer to why do I have to do this is, again, you're developing valuable skills, at least hopefully valuable skills. You're going to gain some confidence presenting information in front of people. Hopefully it's information that you are an expert on, so this will help you to feel a little bit more confident and comfortable with the material you're presenting. And again, it does have a lot to do with active learning. It does force you to go out there and actively look for information and try to make sense of it and try to summarize it in a way that makes sense. And so to an educator, it's a fantastic way of getting students to learn something, is to make them do a poster or a presentation about something. So it really applies to both posters or presentations. Now, why do scientists do this? For scientists, scientific poster sessions are excellent for allowing them to kind of take a look at what they've done so far. If you are a scientist who is going to be presenting their work at a conference, you kind of have to go back and look at what you've done so far and try to figure out, how can I summarize this to prepare any kind of a summary of my work in a poster form. And so it kind of gives you a chance to kind of just sit back and just try to figure out what is the big picture, how do all these things fit together, so far what are my experiments telling me, and what sort of other things do I really need to think about and try to design after this. So it's a great way of taking stock. It also allows scientists to talk to one another and to kind of get feedback on their research. So this way, you're not just the one scientist who's just sitting there in their lab, the only one working on their thing. You are talking to other people who are working on very similar topics. They might be working on similar molecules or maybe even the same molecule. And so you can exchange information, exchange what you've done, exchange tips about what tends to work for you in your laboratory versus what somebody else might be struggling with. So it's a fantastic way to get feedback and also to just connect to fellow researchers. So you could meet people that you hadn't spoken to who are working on something similar, you share common interests and common goals, and so you just kind of make friends in this way as well. So, you know, doing scientific presentations at conferences is a fantastic way for scientists to just kind of connect with one another and gain valuable insights into what other people are doing, and also how their own work kind of fits into the bigger picture, and what else they can do. They can discuss some of the struggles that they might be having with something, and get some input from other people who might be able to offer some help. So what is the purpose of a poster? So once you have, you know, been convinced, hopefully, that you do need to do a poster and there's a good reason for it, what is the purpose of a poster? Let's talk about just in general, posters in general. So not specific scientific papers, but actual just posters that you'd find anywhere else. What are posters trying to accomplish? What is their purpose? Well, you might want to inform, you can explain, or you can try to persuade with a poster. Okay, and so I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. Okay, so basically, in many cases, especially with scientific posters, you're doing a combination. You are trying to inform, you are trying to explain, and you are, in many cases, trying to persuade that your way of looking at the information, looking at the data and explaining it, is the correct way of looking at that data. Okay, so excuse me. So you are trying to do all three with your posters, but again, a poster of any kind will have at least one of these aims for itself as well. So if you look at some of these posters that I have here, the one on the right, in case of injury at work, very visually and very quickly, it transmits a certain bit of information to you. So it is there to kind of inform very quickly, and it tries to do this in a very, very short way, very efficient way. The one on the right, you know, tries to persuade, tries to give you an incentive for becoming a vegetarian or vegan. I'm not even sure if this is a vegetarian or vegan, but reducing meat consumption is what they're trying to promote, right? So they're trying to convince you of something. They are trying to inform, but they are definitely trying to convince you of a particular course of action. Okay, so they are trying to persuade. They are also trying to do a bit of explanation in terms of why they feel that their way of looking at the world is the correct way of looking at the world. Okay, if you look at this poster over here, typical advertising poster, it's not trying to explain anything, but it's definitely trying to persuade. It's trying to explain to you that, well, not explain, but persuade you that if it's good enough for James Bond, it should be good enough for you, right? So again, different posters will have different aims. This one, for example, what do you think this one's trying to do? Is it trying to inform? Is it trying to explain? Is it trying to persuade? What do you think? Feel free to chime in. Anybody?
To convince? To impress?
It's definitely trying to persuade, right? It's kind of a propaganda sort of poster. So it's definitely trying to persuade you of a particular point, possibly even trying to inspire, I guess, right? So it's trying to convince you that, or persuade you to vote, and to vote for this one person because he offers hope. Okay. Other posters might take a known image and try to kind of turn it on its head, kind of subvert the message in a way. Okay, and so again, this poster here might be trying to persuade you to go and see a movie, but in a kind of a funny way, I guess. Okay, so again, the purpose of a poster, can have a variety of reasons for, or a poster might have a variety of different purposes or reasons for being there. But again, in terms of a scientific poster, you are trying to persuade, you're definitely trying to explain, and you are definitely trying to inform. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so first of all, we all know this, that posters need to be well organized. They should be concise. This is any kind of scientific communication really should aim for being concise. you don't want to force someone to stand in front of your poster for half an hour trying to read the whole thing. Okay, so it needs to be fairly brief. It needs to be readable and legible. Okay, so what do we mean by that? So let's talk about this. So first of all, in terms of keeping things concise and well organized, you want to keep things fairly simple. Okay, and again, first of all, the thing to keep in mind is that people are used to reading in a particular way, so they tend to look at the top first, bottom second, and they will tend to move from left to right. So when you are designing your poster, again, the beginning, the stuff that you want them to look at first should be at the top, the upper left corner of your poster. Things that they should be looking at the end should be at the bottom right. Okay, so again, this is kind of the organization of every poster that you're going to be reading, and that's kind of what you should be aiming for as well. Okay. Also, don't overdo things. A lot of posters that I see have way too much text on them. There is not a lot of white space at all. Okay, so really, and again, there is no specific rule that says you should count your words and make sure it's not 1,000, but you should aim for having a relatively short, small amount of text on your poster. Okay, so don't try to explain your whole poster right there in text form. You are going to be there to help answer questions. So try to summarize as much as possible. Okay, and by white space, we basically mean you want to leave some boundaries around the outside of the different sections of your poster. So we'll take a look at some examples of posters later on, so you can see what I mean by that. But basically, even with these slides that you're looking at, there's quite a bit of white space there. There's quite a bit of, not necessarily white space, but spaces that are not filled with text, spaces that you're not meant to be spending a lot of time paying attention to. Okay, so you don't want to overwhelm your audience by giving a whole bunch of tightly packed text. You want to give them kind of some spaces where their eyes can kind of rest, basically. Okay, so margins are very, very important in posters, and I see a lot of the times that people tend to just kind of not use any margins at all in their posters. So as I mentioned, your section should not be text heavy. So again, try to have as few words as possible. Feel free to use bullet points if necessary. Bullet points can be very, very helpful in helping you summarize things without looking like it is a lot of overwhelming text, a lot of overwhelming information. So your poster needs to be appealing, it needs to appeal to the eye, and it's got to signal to the person who's going to be reading it that they're not going to spend the next half an hour trying to read through all of it. Okay, so there should be relatively brief communication in there. And do try to avoid unnecessary distractions. So with everything you want to put on your poster, think about it this way. Does it really add anything to the message that I'm trying to send? Does this add anything to the message that this poster is carrying? Okay, do I really need the logo of this particular company on there? Do I need to have a picture of a mouse on there? Does that add any new information, or is it unnecessary? And so if it's unnecessary, don't put it in there. Okay. In terms of text, this is a very common problem that I see on posters is choices of fonts aren't always great, and also just the font sizes are inappropriate. So we'll see some examples of that in a little while. So you want to make sure that you're choosing appropriate fonts, things that will be fairly easy to read. So if you look at these two different font widths, for example, so I have a font that's got a fairly narrow sort of font to it, and the spacing between the letters is very close. And so if you have a whole bunch of text which is printed in this very narrow, tightly packed font, it's going to be extremely difficult for people to read stuff. Yes, you will be able to squeeze in a lot of information onto your poster, but that is not really the purpose, or that is not the point of having a poster. The point of having a poster is to very quickly and visually communicate something about your experiments. So having a lot of text on it is not ideal, okay? So you should probably aim for a wider font. Again, it's got to be something that's relatively easy to read, okay? And in terms of font weight, by weight we mean, is it bold or is it a normal sort of thickness of a font? You can also have some choices where your the thickness of your font is actually very light. Okay, and so the font weight can be also very important, because if the weight is too light, it's going to be very difficult to see from far away. If it's constantly bold, well, bold is quite often used to highlight important things. So important words might be highlighted using bold font. If everything is written in bold, then you're trying to highlight everything, and it will be overwhelming to the reader at that point. And speaking of readability, you need to make sure that it is going to give you a good contrast. So you should try to avoid having colors that are similar in the text and the background. Okay. The spacing should be good, so it shouldn't be too packed together. So if you have lines right underneath one another, it's going to be very difficult to read. So you got to leave some spaces between the lines for the eyes to read. Okay. And if you're going to be using all capitals, only use it in the titles. Okay, do not use all caps throughout the whole poster. So, I mean, you've seen for yourself, if someone's ever written you an email or a text message in all caps, it kind of seems like they're shouting at you. You don't want to be shouting at your audience from your poster. So avoid all caps and only keep them in the titles where it is important. Okay. Now, what I have here is actually a link that goes into a lot more detail about using fonts and making sure that your fonts are readable and really selecting the most appropriate thing for your poster or for any kind of printed media. So I do recommend going through that and just kind of reading through it. But again, as long as you are making choices that you don't hate yourself, and your friends don't hate, you should be fine. So whenever you're designing a poster, have your friends take a look at it and give you some comments about how easy it is to read. Okay, and we'll give you some tips on what you can do in a moment in terms of making sure that it is readable. Okay, so but definitely check out this website here if you want more details about working with fonts and selecting the most appropriate one. It's an excellent resource. And by the way, these slides will be available to you. So they are online, so you can access them at any time after this presentation. So don't worry if you want to be able to get that link later. It will be available to you within those slides. Okay. Now, since we're talking about making sure that your stuff is readable, this image here actually shows exactly what I would like you guys to do when you are preparing your posters. Okay, so once you have decided on which font you want to use and which font size you want to use for your poster, before you print the whole poster out itself, I want you to write out some of the text that you want to use on your poster from one of the sections, put it into an A4 sheet and print it off at that specific size. Okay, so what if you're choosing to use 20-point font for your text and a 36-point font for your headings, then I want you to try printing some headings at 36 points and some text at 20 points on a piece of paper, just an A4 sheet. Then I want you to do exactly what this image shows. Put it on the ground and stand in front of it. Okay. If you can read it comfortably from just standing up without squinting, and if the paper's on the floor in front of you at your feet, if you can read that comfortably, then it's probably readable and it's legible enough for you to be able, for anyone else to be able to read it. So basically, for a poster, people don't stand right in front of the poster. They tend to stand about 1.5 meters to 2 meters away from it to be able to read it. And you need to make sure that it is capable, that people will be capable of reading it from that distance. So again, this is a quick and easy way of doing it, is just basically take a piece of paper, print off your text, and try to read it while you're standing up above it. Okay, so put it on the floor in front of you, stand up, and try to read what you've written on that A4 sheet. If it's legible enough, if you're able to read it comfortably enough, then the sizes they've selected are probably fine. Okay, so again, a lot of students quite often will ask, well, what font size should I use? That's a very difficult question to answer because depending on which font you're using, the sizes may differ. Okay, so some fonts are bigger than others, and so some font sizes will have to be changed based on the font that you're using. And so the simplest way to figure out if it's an appropriate size is just simply print off some text in the exact font size that you want to use on your poster, print it off on a piece of A4 paper, put it on the ground in front of you, and try reading exactly like this. Now stand up in front of it, take a look down, and try to read it. If you can, then it's a good size. Okay, probably the easiest way to do it. And keep in mind that, again, your poster needs to look inviting. It should not look like it's going to take forever to read it. It should not look like it's going to be painful to get through the whole thing. Okay, so make sure that whatever you're doing when you are designing your poster, you make it as inviting as possible for the reader. Okay, so again, this is where the appropriate font sizes will be important, but also having those spaces that I talked about. Okay, so just so you understand what I'm talking about, let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so I have a bunch of posters that we'll be looking at, and I want you guys to kind of give me some feedback from yourselves for what you think is right and what you think is wrong with these posters. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show you is kind of a joke poster. This was generated by a man named Colin Burrington. He has a fantastic website that goes through some poster design tips. I do encourage you guys to go check it out before you do any posters. He has some very good tips on presentations, on attending conferences. He also has some templates. Okay, so he's posted some PowerPoint templates that you can use to help design your own posters as well. So again, if your department or your college hasn't given you a specific template to use for your posters, feel free to grab one of his templates and try to use that instead. Okay, so that will be a good starting point for you. Now, what do you think is wrong with this particular poster? Okay, so can you guys point out some of the issues that, and again, he was trying very hard. This is not a good poster from him. He was trying actually to make a bad poster here, just to show some of the concept he's trying to explain. So what do you think are some of the bad aspects of this poster? What kind of mistakes can you identify here? Anybody? What sort of mistakes can you guys see on that poster? What's wrong with it? Okay.
The font is too small.
So some of you weren't here when I said this initially. I can't see the chat messages when you guys are sending messages on the chat. I can't see it when the presentation's on the screen. So I need you guys to speak up if you have something to contribute, okay? So I'm seeing a lot of text is too small, a lot of text, good. I want you to notice also that the sizes of the different frames are completely inconsistent. So you have some frames that are extremely wide, like the conclusions frame is very, very wide. It will be very, very difficult to really read this efficiently because the lines are so long. Okay, one of the reasons, like if you look in your textbooks or in articles, you'll notice that those are divided up into columns. You don't have a big long line going all the way across the page. You actually have multiple columns going across the page. Okay, so when you have this extremely long line, it actually makes it very difficult to read. Okay, so the sizes of the frames are inconsistent. They're all over the place. So there's that. What else? What else are you guys seeing besides text sizes and so on? Again, I can't.
The font size is too small.
The font size is too small. Okay. It's definitely difficult to read. It's not impossible, but it's definitely difficult to read. Okay. What else?
It's crowded and there's no space.
Right. There's very crowded. There's very little actual margins here. There's very little space in between the different sections. What else?
It's too dark.
So it's very dark. Again, it's not necessarily a terrible thing because you're trying to create some contrast between your text and the background. So the dark isn't necessarily a bad thing. Does it need to have stars on it? Probably not. You're not making a Star Wars movie right now, right? Just making a poster. What else is wrong?
Doctor, there is too
many logos.
Let's try one more time.
Too many logos, Doctor.
Too many logos, yeah. There's a lot of logos on here for no particular reason, okay? If you have to have a logo on your poster, just make it small somewhere in the corner. Don't make it a big part of your whole poster. What else?
Dark. It's not orange.
Sorry, what's orange?
Yeah, the conclusion and the...
Okay, so again, the background colors are inconsistent within the actual boxes. You also have this very strange sort of font color for the title, which doesn't really pop out very well. Okay, so there's a lot of different problems with this one. What about the mouse? I guess this is a guinea pig on the scale. Is that necessary? Absolutely not, right? The other thing I want to point out is the whole purpose of your poster is to present your results. How big is this person's results section? I mean, their abstract is longer than the results section, okay? And again, posters are meant to visually present information, visually present your results. So really there should be some figures in here and tables and charts. There shouldn't be all text, right? Okay, so let's take a look at some other examples of actual posters. This was more of a joke poster, but here's an example of a real poster that someone posted. Can you give me some feedback on this one? Is this appealing? Do you want to read this?
No, yes. Too much text.
No, I know I don't want to read this. Okay, this is it's a lot of text on here, right? Lots of big blocks of text and very, very tiny text. Okay, so when you look at this, it doesn't make you want to read this. So if you are walking around at a conference trying to look at what other people are doing, do you really think that you're going to spend a lot of time in front of this poster, or are you going to try to find something else that might be a little bit more interesting looking, right? So again, make sure that your poster doesn't turn people off. Make sure that your poster appeals to people and makes them want to actually stop and take a look. Okay, so you can do that by making it clear that it's not going to take them 2 hours to go through the whole thing and understand it. Okay, so big blocks of small text is one big problem that I see with this poster. There's also very little white space, so there's like no margins almost, especially at the bottom. There's practically no margins, right? I do like the fact that they have a conclusions box that's very clearly identified and they have bullet points there. So at least they kind of try to take some of the hard work away from the reader and say, okay, take a look at this box here. The most important things are in here. Well, why don't you make the whole poster this easy to kind of understand? Okay, so it does have good organization, so you can see here that the results and discussion are the major components here. It does have some visual information, so we have graphs and tables here that kind of summarize information. And again, that conclusions box definitely helps. But again, if I'm walking around at a conference, looking around, I'm probably not going to want to spend a lot of time looking at this poster. It's simply just got way too much text. It's very, very small, and it's going to take up way too much of my time to try to understand all of this. Okay, they're just trying to introduce way too much information in here. Okay, let's take a look at, does anybody have any other comments on this one? I mean, overall, I mean, design-wise, it's relatively nice. It's got, you know, this color scheme is fairly nice in terms of it's consistent. But again, it's just too much text, I think. That's the biggest issue with this one, is too much text. Okay. How about this one? What can you tell me about this one? How do you feel about it? Would you read this? Would you stop by and ask the person questions about this? What do you think?
I feel like it's like all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
The picture.
So the organization is not very clear, is it? It's kind of hard to tell where you're supposed to go. You have the introduction, you have a biochemistry section, you have a model that's a lot of formulas that, let's just not look at those too closely. Then you have a whole bunch of diagrams and graphs and things, and there's like lines connecting things with arrows and things. It's not ideal. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what these people are doing, right? So this is not an ideal way of presenting this information. Besides the organization, what else can you tell me?
Text too small.
Yes, text here is even smaller than it was on the previous poster, right? So the previous poster had bigger text than this. So the text here is tiny. The other thing is that the headings are actually in an italic font, okay? Italic fonts don't actually highlight things. They don't actually do a very good job of increasing emphasis. They actually carry less emphasis or less importance. So avoid using italics in your headings. Also, the headings have a serif font. The serifs are the little decorative elements, that are little things that are just kind of poking out. So if you look at the eye, it's not just a single line, it's got these little parts at the top and bottom that kind of spread outwards. Those are serifs, okay? And so avoid using a serif font for headings and titles. Those tend to be much better for actual blocks of text, but they're not so good for headings. They don't really give the heading the necessary emphasis that they need, okay? Now, some of the good things about this poster is that most of the results here are presented graphically. So there's not a lot of text. It's very tiny, but there isn't a lot of it. Most of the information here is actually fairly graphical. So again, if you are in computational modeling in neurobiology, a lot of this might actually make a lot of sense to you. Okay, so again, from a non-specialist perspective, this poster doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Okay. And again, part of the problem, I think, is the organization. Okay, but if this is your field, then you probably look at the graphs and say, okay, I can understand what this means, right? And so the fact that a lot of the information is presented graphically is actually a very strong point for this particular poster. Okay. Any other comments on this one? Okay, let's move on to the next poster. Okay. So here's molecular biology, so that's a little bit more up my alley, okay? And so again, what can you tell me about this poster?
The text is way too small.
The text is way too small, okay, good.
Doctor, the blue color is distracting, you can't focus.
Can't focus on it, okay. I think one of the problems with this poster are the frames, okay? So if I switch to the next slide, you can actually see the same thing without the borders. So you can look at these two posters. The exact same poster, I just took out the frames. It makes a difference, doesn't it? Okay, so think about how you design your posters. In some cases, just removing a small element just makes the whole thing look different. Okay, so what we do have here is a problem is that the text is very, very small. Now, again, if we look at this organization in general, we have an abstract, we have background, which is very short, which is, I guess that's good. It's not too much text on here. But it's kind of difficult to really see what's next. So I guess you could just follow the, top to bottom, left to right sort of way of doing it. But it doesn't have the same sort of organization that typical scientific posters would have. So it doesn't have a results section, doesn't have a discussion or conclusion. Well, I guess it has a conclusion section, but it doesn't really necessarily go through the same sort of sections that you normally would. So you've got background, but how much of this is background? How much of this is, going to be the actual results? So results section, that seems to be in the middle and in the bottom. What about the other stuff? Okay, so what are these different things, right? So the organization could be a little bit better, but I think my biggest issue with this is just the text size is very, very small. And again, I think if you get rid of the frames, it makes this a little less cluttered, a little bit more easy to really just kind of scan around, okay? So there's a bit more white space visible here. Again, it's not ideal. There's barely any space around the outside at all, right? So it's not ideal, but again, it feels better, I think, to me at least. It feels better to look at this compared to this, okay? Let's take a look. Anybody have any other comments on this one? Again, the nice thing about this poster is that we are focusing very much on the results. There's a lot of graphical information presented here. There's not a lot of text. Again, it just feels like it's a little overwhelming because of just how tightly everything is packed, okay? How about this one? How do we feel about this one? Is this a good poster, a bad poster?
The background picture
Mm-hmm.
is like, I don't know.
It's a little overwhelming, right? It's a little bit too much. Okay, so just because you have an awesome photo doesn't mean you should use it as your background for your poster. Okay, there's ways of introducing images into your posters that are a little less distracting, but this is a little bit too much, right? What else? What else can you tell me about this?
The text colors are not clear, especially the brownish mustard color.
Right, exactly. So it seems like they are trying very hard to kind of use this orange color as their highlighting color. They're trying to identify important things that they're trying to highlight for your attention. But actually, the orange doesn't actually pop out as much as the white text. So it just seems to hide that information. Instead of highlighting it, you're actually doing the opposite of what you wanted to do. So there's less emphasis with that color. So again, be aware of the contrasts. Make sure that you have good contrast between your background and your text so that things are as clearly visible as possible. Because right now, this poster, some of the text is very difficult to read just simply because of the color they chose, right? What else can you tell me about this poster?
Also, the text, it is small.
Yeah, definitely the text is a little too small to be read from 2 meters away. Again, think about it this way. You would be standing about 2 meters away from this poster, but this poster would be a lot larger than it currently looks on your screen. So basically the way you're sitting in front of your screen right now is roughly what you'll be seeing in real life. Okay, and so again, this is not super appealing to me in terms of wanting to sit down or stand up and read this thing, but there's some good aspects to this as well. Notice how much free space there is around your text. There's quite a bit of empty space there. Okay, so it doesn't seem overwhelming. Okay, when you compare this to this or this especially, there's a huge difference between the amount of white space in this particular poster and the amount of space on this poster. And again, by white space, I don't mean it's white. I just mean it's empty. It doesn't have any information, doesn't have anything for you to pay attention to. Okay, so that's an important component to have on a poster. So again, they did a good job of spacing things out and minimizing the amount of text that they have on here. Problem is that the way they presented it visually is not ideal. Okay, so it's relatively well organized. It has a good amount of white space, but the text is still too small. And I think part of the reason that they have this much space is because they made their text a little bit smaller than they really should have. Okay, so overall, again, not terrible, but not great either. Okay, let's try another one. How about this one? What do you think?
I think it's good.
Yeah,
I like it too.
It's not bad, right? So
I
yes, they
also
used an
like
image. Yeah, they used an image, but they used it very differently from the previous poster, right? And here the image doesn't really get in the way. It's just kind of there. It's kind of giving a background, but it doesn't really distract from the message that much. Okay, so it's not terrible. You have very readable text. Notice that wherever you're sitting, however far away you're sitting from your screen right now, you should be able to very clearly read everything on there, right? How much text do we have here? Is it overwhelming? No, it's just a small amount of text, right? It's not huge. They didn't write that much on this poster. What are some of the problems that you see with this?
The gray color.
What's wrong with the gray color?
It's making the text a bit unreadable.
Okay. So it's decreased the contrast a little bit, right? Okay. Now, again, black text on a white background isn't ideal. If you're spending a lot of time staring at white text on a white background on a computer screen, actually it's going to hurt your eyes. So it's not a bad idea to stay away from white and black. Grays are not a bad thing, but probably having a lighter gray would have been a better choice in this case. Okay, so that's not a bad idea. Okay, so having a light, so like the light gray that they used for their figure 2, I think, that probably would have given a better contrast with their text compared to the other grays that they're using. Okay, what else can we, say could be improved about this poster?
I think the organization.
Right. So again, remember, top to bottom, left to right. So according to that, our conclusions came before the results or the objective, right? Also, if you have to guide your reader through your poster with arrows, that might indicate to me that maybe your organization could use a little bit more work, right? Because, if you're going from problem to objective to a couple of these figures, and then there's the methods, and then results are at the bottom right corner, and then conclusions are at the upper right corner, something's not quite right. Okay, so again, they've done a lot of things right with this poster, but there's things that could still be improved. Okay, so again, it's a good background, it's at least not terrible background. Okay, but the organization is definitely a problem here. It's definitely an issue. Okay, so good text level, at least the amount of text is good. They're using point form, so you notice they're using bullet points here, so not necessarily point form, but they're using brief, few sentences here, a few sentences there. They're not filling the whole poster with text. And this text size is good. A bit of contrast could have been, increased, so you could have had a bit better readability. But really, the biggest issue here is the organization. Okay. Any other comments on this one? Okay. Let's try one last one before we move on. Okay, so I'm sorry about the legibility of this one. This was a very tiny picture, so I had to blow it up, and the resolution is not very good. So that's why you probably can't read the text, at least partially why you can't read the text here very well. I couldn't find a larger version of this. I thought it was a good example of what I wanted to show, but unfortunately I just couldn't find a higher resolution image. Okay, so clearly the resolution is my problem, but what do you think are the problems with this poster? Or if you don't have any problems with it, also tell me.
I think it's good, it's just the font is too small.
Okay, so yeah, the organization is definitely nice. It's definitely very light on the eyes. It's easy on the eyes, right? There's clear, large borders around the outside. There's no text on the outside, all from going from edge to edge. The text is small. And again, that's one of the reasons I picked this, is that it's not bad, but again, the amount of text that's on there is not too much, but it's just very, very small. Okay, so overall, this is a pretty good poster. They just could have increased the font just a little bit to make it more readable. Again, if you were standing in the front of this about 2 meters away, it would probably look about as good as it does right now. Okay, the things that I do like about this is it is very well organized. You can clearly, just follow abstract methods and then results. You have results and it focuses on results. Most of the poster shows you results. Okay, and then just brief conclusion and it's done, right? It doesn't have a lot of text for you to read. It's very easy to look at this, and within 2 to 5 minutes, especially if you're in the field, within 2 minutes, you know exactly what this poster is about and what they found. Okay. Again, even if you're not in the field, you should be able to figure this stuff out relatively quickly, and then just ask the person questions if you need to. Okay, so again, not a bad poster. I just wish they had used a bigger font. Okay, and I think that was the only issue I have with this poster. Again, lots of white space available. The amount of text is not overwhelming. Again, the focus is in terms of having the results and mostly graphical results, so you don't have a lot of text on there. I think it's a near perfect poster except for the amount of the size of the text, not the amount of text, but the size of the text. Okay, so hopefully based on these examples, you have a better understanding of what sort of things you should be trying for with your own posters. Okay, any questions so far before we move on to the actual presentation? because yes, there is a presentation. Again, if you're typing anything in the chat message, I can't see it right now, so you have to speak up. Okay, so let's talk about the presentation, because your poster is not something that stands on its own. It's meant to, but at a conference, you would be standing right next to your poster. Okay, so what you need to do is make sure that you have a presentation ready. Okay, you need to make sure that your presentation is brief, because you will have about 2 to 3 minutes per person. You cannot talk to someone about your poster for half an hour. I've had this happen to me. I've gone to undergraduate poster days, and I have asked a question or asked the students to walk me through their poster, and they talked to me for about half an hour. And if I'm trying to evaluate their poster plus 20 others, I don't have that kind of time. Okay. So you don't have half an hour to explain your poster. You have 2 to 3 minutes per person. So what you want to do is, again, your poster is a summary of your research, and your presentation is going to be a summary of that summary. So you have to come up with the most important key points that you want people to take away from your poster. Okay, so here's what we did, here's why we did it, here's what our main result was. Okay, again, your poster is not going to cover 2 years worth of research probably. It's going to cover a few experiments. So you're not going to have that much data to present, and so just make sure that you come up with the most important components and try to make up something that's going to be fairly memorable for them. Okay, so something that they can say, oh, okay, I know what this person's doing, and 10 minutes later, they can still know, oh, okay, I remember what that person was talking about. Okay, so make it memorable, but again, 2 to 3 minutes per person maximum, because again, if you are standing in front of your poster, explaining your poster to one person for 30 minutes, then you are not talking to 20 or 30 other people who are also looking at your poster and who might have questions, but they're not the ones you're talking to right now. Okay, so you need to make sure you have a very brief presentation that you can kind of, just say a few sentences about your poster and summarize it, and that's it. Okay, and so in this case, also think about your audience. Okay, if you are going into a room where you're going to be talking to people who are in the same field as you, you can talk, and use more technical language. But if you are at an interdisciplinary meeting, then you need to really kind of change the language of your presentation a little bit to make sure that it's accessible to the people who might not be in your field, might not know what this particular method does, or why this is important. So you need to change the content and the language you're using based on the audience that you're likely to have at that particular conference or that particular meeting. This goes for class presentations as well. Again, if you are presenting to your class and you're all talking about the same experiment, then don't waste your time talking about the methods of your experiment, because they all did the same methods. Okay, talk about your results, focus on your results, because really that's the main purpose of the presentation anyway. The purpose of your poster is to discuss your results, to inform people about your results, right? And try to convince them that this is okay, that these results are what they're supposed to be. And remember, you don't have to tell them everything. Okay, this is the thing that I think most students miss about trying to come up with their poster presentations. Is, again, the reason they talk about the poster for half an hour is they're trying to tell me about everything they did from beginning to end, which again, I understand you're probably excited about your research and you want to tell me all about it, but really leave me something so I can ask you questions about it. Okay, so again, 2 to 3 minutes is really all you're trying to aim for with your presentation. Try to make it memorable, and leave some space for people to have questions for you. Okay, because then they can ask you about something. You can kind of go into a little bit more detail about something that you did. They may not be interested about everything that you did, but they might be interested about 1 or 2 things that they might want to ask you about. And so again, don't spend 30 minutes talking about everything about your poster. Have a short, focused presentation about the main takeaways from your poster, and then have people just ask you questions about things. That's probably the better way to do this. Okay. Now, in terms of the actual presentation, again, most students are, I guess most people in general, are really afraid of public speaking. There was a survey done back in the late 70s by a newspaper asking people what they feared the most in their life. And public speaking came out on top. Death came second. Okay, so people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. Okay, that tells you something. Okay, It tells you that most people don't want to talk publicly. They probably don't want to present posters. Why are we making you do it? Because we need you to practice that skill. At some point, you will have to present something in public. Okay, so the key to presenting anything, especially if you're going to be nervous about it, is to practice. Okay, practice, practice, practice. And so there's 3 practices I want you guys to do. Practice by yourself. So first of all, come up with your talk. Come up with what you're going to say. Don't memorize it. If you try to memorize your presentation, you are going to get tripped up at some point. You're going to forget a word that you're going to use, and everything stops at that point. Okay, so what you should try to do is just kind of understand the key points that you want to get across, and then you can use whatever language you want to get that across. Okay, so practice by yourself first. Make sure that you're comfortable with the material that you want to present, and make sure that you get it to a point where it's relatively short. Okay. Then I want you guys to practice in front of your family. And these are people who love you. They have to love you. They have no choice. So you can rely on them. Maybe rely on them, I guess. You can force them to listen to your presentation. Okay. They have no choice. You are their family. You know, you can force them to listen to you talk. Okay. So practice in front of your family. And then lastly, practice in front of your friends. Okay. Your family is going to potentially be non-specialist. So they might have questions for you that will be useful for you to try to, I need to explain this a little bit better because that did not get across very well what I wanted to say, okay? And practicing in front of your friends might help you because chances are your friends are in the same courses as you. They have the same background as you. So they might be able to ask you more technical questions about what it is you're trying to present. So again, all these different things will allow you to practice doing your talk to make sure that you are hitting the points you want to hit, and that you are staying within your time limit. Again, there's nothing magical about 2 to 3 minutes. It's not a hard and fast rule. If you're speaking for 4 minutes, it's perfectly fine. Don't stress out about it. What I'm saying though with that 2 to 3 minutes is that you don't want to spend 30 minutes, okay? So you want to keep it relatively short, no more than 5 minutes per person, okay? And so in all the above cases, the reason you want to practice like this is you are hopefully facing a friendly and supportive audience. Again, your brother may not be very happy to have to listen to your presentation, so he might not be that supportive, but he probably won't walk out on you. Okay, so hopefully you'll be facing a friendly and supportive audience with your poster. Again, convince them that they need to be nice to you. Okay, maybe offer ice cream at the end or something. And you're likely to get some feedback in the end. So you're going to be able to go back to your presentation and say, okay, most of my questions were about this. Maybe I need to explain this a little bit better. Okay, so doing a few practice sessions is going to really help you. And again, at the same time, it's getting you more and more familiar with the topic and more familiar with how you want to present it, so that when the time comes to actually present it, it's a bit more automatic. It's a bit less stressful at that point, because at that point you've practiced so many times that it's just an automatic thing. Okay, so that helps to take care of some of the stress. Now the presentation itself is an important thing as well. So preparation is nice, but at the presentation itself, a very common mistake that I see is that people kind of just, you ask them a question, they turn away from you, and they start talking to their poster, okay? And you need to make sure that you're not reading your poster to your audience, okay? If you are the one reading the poster, then why should I bother asking you any questions about it? I can just read it myself much more quickly, okay? So we're able to read faster than we're able to speak. So if all you're doing is reading the poster, then you're wasting everybody's time. So you need to be expert enough about your topic to be able to pull out the most important information and present that instead of just reading the whole poster to somebody, okay? You should be next to your poster. So I've been to a few presentations where I've come, I see a poster, I see no person who can answer my questions, so I guess I have to move on, okay? And again, in those cases, you are missing out on the opportunity to get feedback on your research. Okay, so make sure that you are next to your poster when you're presenting, and so when the poster is up there as much as possible. I mean, you're not going to be able to stand there the whole time, but as much as possible, you want to be near your poster so you can answer questions. Keep in mind that scientists can be antisocial. We're not all happy to chat with everybody. Okay, some people are very antisocial, and so some of them will just want to read your poster and don't bother them, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, so some people will just kind of stand, a couple of meters away, and they'll just kind of look at your poster and let you answer other people's questions. They don't really want to talk to you, and that's fine. Okay, so keep that in mind that not everyone needs to have the poster explained to them. And again, if they have questions for you later on, they will be usually quite happy to ask questions. Okay. When you are talking to your audience, make sure you make eye contact. Again, this is kind of a corollary of do not read your poster to your audience. Okay, you should be looking at the person you're speaking to, not at your poster. So try to make eye contact. It makes for better contact with the person you're speaking with. Speak slowly. Okay, this is a very common thing that I see with any kind of a presentation. Because people are stressed out, they quite often take breaths that are too big. And when you take up too much air, it tends to escape much more quickly, and so you speak very, very fast. So let's try to breathe normally and try to speak slowly. Just speak a little bit slower than you think you need to. And again, if you practice your presentation to be 2 to 3 minutes, then if you speak slowly and it takes 4 minutes, it's not a big deal. Okay, so again, try to speak slowly. One last tip I'm going to give you is this. Bring one of these with you. Bring some water. Okay. If you are doing a great job with your poster, then you're probably going to be pretty popular. People will be coming by and reading your poster, and you'll probably be answering lots of questions. So you will need some water. The other reason you want to have this is that if someone asks you a question, then you can always grab your water and say, oh, that's a really good question. Let me just think about this. Have some water. It allows you to stall a little bit for time if necessary, so that you can come up with an answer before you answer the question. Okay. But the other thing is, keep in mind that it's okay not to know all the answers. Okay. As much as you are meant to be the expert on your particular bit of research, sometimes the questions that you get might go a little bit beyond what you might be reasonably expected to know. Especially as an undergraduate student, sometimes you might get a question that's just way out there and you have no idea how to answer that. And that can be a very stressful situation. Just understand that you don't have to be an expert on everything in your field, okay? And it's perfectly fine to say, you know what, I don't know. That's a very good question. I just don't know the answer. I think you can give, you know, a guess as to what it could be. But I can say, you know what, I honestly, I don't know. If I had to guess, I would probably say probably this because of X, Y, and Z, okay? But it's perfectly fine not to know the answer to every single question you might get, okay? And I think if you understand that at the start, it might make the whole presentation a little bit less stressful for you in the end, okay? So those of you who are working on posters, you have some hard work ahead of you. And I think if you pay attention to even some of the tips I have given you, I think you'll be just fine. Okay, so I'm sure you'll be doing great, and you'll be making some really nice posters that I look forward to seeing in the near future. Okay, so thank you for your time. The link that you see at the end here is actually a link for this presentation. So you guys will be able to access these slides on SlideShare. So feel free to just copy this link or just scan the QR code and it'll take you to the actual presentation itself. Okay, so does anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay.
Do we have to make our posters like the type that stands on the like on the table, so like the one that does not hang?
I think it depends on the venue. Okay, so in some cases you just print off a sheet. Okay, and I think it's in most cases that's what you do these days. There might be some presentations where you might be asked to make sure that it's able to stand up on its own. And in those cases, you can just print off an actual sheet of the poster and then just attach it to one of those boards. So you can buy the board separately and just attach your poster to it. Okay, but in most cases, most conferences, you will have a space where you will be able to just attach your poster directly. Okay, so I mean, on the cover, on like the opening slide of my presentation, in this slide here, you can see there are these stands where basically you would just go ahead and attach your posters. So you just print off your poster on a piece of paper on a large sheet, and then just basically you can carry that anywhere with you. It's much more portable this way. So most people tend to just print these off on a sheet like this. They roll it up and they move it they take it with them from conference to conference. Okay, so the presentation boards that you may have used in the past quite often were used in high schools. Most places won't require you to have that. Usually you just have to have a printed sheet. Okay.
Does it matter if the poster was horizontal or vertical, like the page itself?
Right. So if it's portrait or landscape mode, it depends on you probably in terms of how you want to organize it. In some cases, I've seen some schools might basically give you a template and say you have to use this one. That's what we want. And that template might just be in landscape mode, in which case you just you're stuck using what they give you. Okay. But really it just depends on how you want to organize, what makes more sense. Okay. So for example, on landscape mode, so one that's kind of more wide than it is tall, you could have 3 columns of text, of information. Whereas if you're looking at something that's portrait mode, that's something that's a bit tall rather than wide, you probably can squeeze in 2 columns. Okay, so it just depends on how you want to organize your text and your materials.
So I have a question. Is it gonna be on Word or PowerPoint?
So where you design your poster is really up to you. I think most people tend to use PowerPoint because they tend to use the text frames, and it's easier to move things around in PowerPoint because people are just used to moving around text frames in PowerPoint. So I think that's why a lot of people will use PowerPoint. But which software you're using for this really is up to you, in most cases at least. Again, if your college or the department gives you a template, you need you to use this template, it's a PowerPoint file, then you're kind of stuck using whatever they give you. But in general, it's really up to you. Any other questions? Okay, so if that was everything, then thank you for your time. And we'll see you at the next presentation, whenever that happens to be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, girls. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Doctor.